Chad, good to have you here, man.
Yeah, happy to be here.
You know, Utah is such a unique place. There's so much opportunity. There's so many people doing amazing things and so many companies, these SaaS companies or tech companies that are really moving the needle and doing incredible things. It's funny, I had heard of you, but didn't know anything about what you do until we kind of started talking about doing this podcast. And it just goes to show the depth of the amount of people in Utah that are really moving the needle in that space.
Yeah, it's awesome. And what's kind of cool is every time we go through one of these like market shifts, like you think about like, what happened in 2008, like think about all the incredibly amazing startups, now I guess post startup phase that like their products we use today, that were created in that environment. So sometimes I think about that, like, today I get calls from like younger entrepreneurs or like messages on LinkedIn, like, hey, can we get on a call? I, want to ask you about your story and like learn. And I talk to those people and I think like, how many of these people are going to go and create like the next crazy big thing? So it's kind of cool.
Yeah,
Lots going on here.
I play this game where I try to, anytime somebody reaches out to me, like for every person I reach up to, I try to reach down and help somebody, right? But it becomes pretty difficult. I mean, as you get going, you see why celebrities and, just CEOs and people, why they have to have handlers and people in their way, because I would say yes to everything if I could, but you kind of really do discover you only have so much bandwidth. And so you've got to really protect that if you're building your own thing.
Yeah. Haven't you also found like, how long have you been an entrepreneur now?
Oh gosh. Since for 20 years,
Yeah. Like, haven't you found the longer you've gone in your entrepreneur career, like the more you feel like you say no?
Well, I feel like you have to. It's just a matter of logistics for me, right? When I was coming up, I had this theory. There's the Jim Carrey movie, Yes Man. It's such a good movie, and it is a great principle. And I always had this theory: I'm going to say yes to everything. And so I would take all these different meetings, but in that, a lot of things happen. Number one is I always said, well, anybody's a potential home buyer. I should get to know them. You never know who I'm going to meet through whoever. But unfortunately, I ended up taken a lot of meetings with people that were really selfish, were really not ethical. You don't know that. You just assume everybody's good, right? And so I ended up, unfortunately, getting taken advantage of a few times. And every time that happens, you kind of shelter up a little bit. You kind of put on another, another layer of fencing to keep you away from people, because I just kind of, like, there was a dude right now, I've been texted like 3 different times in the last month. There's a dude using my name. I had him on my podcast forever ago, but it was more of a story of kind of caution. And he's kind of using it like, hey,
like a social
Jimmy had me on.
Thing?
Yeah. He's kind of, I call it borrowing credibility, right? People will try to attach themselves to you. So I've had to come out and be like, look, if you see me in a photo with somebody, or you see me interacting with somebody, or even if I speak on somebody's stage, I've had to, really pull that all back and go, wait, I need to be really careful what I lend my influence to, because I've worked so hard to build up my reputation, and people will try to almost like steal it or borrow it to give themselves credibility. And they don't always have people's best interest in mind. Yeah,
it's tough, right? It's like that kind of everyone's faking it till they make it kind of thing, right? And like they want what you have, I guess. But it's hard to avoid that. Like for me though, I found that the longer you go in your career, like you get better at identifying like what's going to be a waste of time or not, right? For
sure, yeah.
Like you just kind of do. Like literally, it's funny. I was just in a meeting before this meeting. I was on a Zoom meeting, and some like kind of maybe potential pseudo competitor to Distro, which is my startup now, reached out for like potential synergies and partnership, and that's how it always starts, right? Mm-hmm. And like we get into it, and they're like, yeah, we're direct competitors, right? Like, this is such a waste of time, And anyway, it's those things. Like I think you get better and better at like kind of sniffing those out.
No, you do. In real estate, I had a lot of people that would say, hey, I want to join your team. And at first I was like, yeah, come join my team. And I'd spend all this time training them. They'd close 1 deal or 0 deals. They'd steal all my systems, my information. And then they're not steal, but they would basically take it. And then they would leave, And I started going, wait, what am I doing here? I don't want to build up my competition. And so I actually kept my team really small, but it is, there's different areas where you just start seeing like there's just different ways they ask the question, or there's different vulnerabilities. And I think you can read people's energies differently and stuff too as you get older.
It's the authenticity, right?
Like, you've just seen it, you know?
Yeah, right. You could just kind of like see whether somebody's authentic. I think that's one of like the biggest core values for me now is like just being authentic, like not worrying about if you're going to offend somebody. I mean, sometimes, you could be careful about what you say or do, but imagine what a world would look like if everyone was just like the real them.
Yeah. Well, for my coaching program, I have 3 pillars. It's vulnerable, authentic, and in integrity.
There you go.
So the second one is authentic. And here's the way I tell people, the reason why it's so important to be authentic, at least you know where you stand with people. I used to hate when I was a kid and like, I never knew where I stood with somebody.
Yeah.
And so as an adult, I was just like, I'm just going to be me. And that way, if people like me, at least I know they really do like me. And if they don't, at least I know why. And so, because if you're faking who you are and to make everybody like you, well, it doesn't do you any good because they like a version of you that you're sharing that's not even you.
Yeah, exactly. In fact, in my last company, I had an employee call me out, and I thought it was pretty interesting. She, I guess that like with my last company, it was called Jump, and we started it in December of 2016. So I usually say like January 17, and then sold it 3 years later. And, but like midway through that period, I was like getting like heavy into the VC fundraising stuff, and we'd raised some money. And I had an employee call me out that I was dressing differently and talking differently because I was trying to emulate the people that I was like trying to impress. Right. And I actually made a post on LinkedIn about this the other day, is that like, why do we seek to impress people, right? Like, I think good impressions are good, but like seeking to impress people really has the connotation that like we need their approval, and that in itself didn't seem super authentic to me. And so I'm glad, somebody had called me out at some point, and I could probably use more of that, but like, it's just kind of interesting, like, that
I think concept. I think it's important to have people around you in life that are willing to say hard things, right? I try to encourage that in my life, and sometimes maybe I don't do a good enough a job, but I like people that help keep me grounded, like you said. But there is also people say like, well, you just accept me as I am. It's like, no, I want to accept the best version of you. Right. And I like to say, you are enough and capable of so much more. Exactly. So I'll give you an example of like appearances, just to give you one example. I remember when I first got my real estate license, I interviewed with 3 companies, and the first one was a Remax guy, and it was fine. The next one was an Exit Realty, and then I interviewed with a friend. I ended up going with the friend, but when I interviewed with the Exit Realty guy, I remember he had a polo shirt on, and it had like a stain on it. And it was just, I could not get past the stain. I was like, this guy is not dialed in. And so it did matter enough that it cost me going there, which cost that guy over years, hundreds of thousands of dollars, because he couldn't learn how to dress in a way that was appropriate, And so I do think it's important to, like, I think it's okay to dress to impress, or I like to dress up sometimes just to do it. Like my buddy throws these big poker games, and every time I'm like, I just want to be a shit show. I just kind of I'll wear my cowboy outfit or my,
But that version of you then is okay, right? Right. Like you're intentional about it. Yeah, no, I like that clarification. I think that's interesting. I'll give you an example of kind of the perspective I'm talking about. I was, I invested in this company, I don't know, a couple of years ago. And so I was just a shareholder, and somebody asked me, because I'm kind of the tech advisor or whatever, and they asked me to sit in this interview for hiring somebody. And the other 2 board members were like, I mean, not to be ageist, but like super old school. Okay. They were like super old school. Like I say dude in an interview, and they like cringe at that. Right. and anyway, so we're like interviewing, and they're asking like these just kind of like crazy questions that aren't really getting at the core of who this person is, more about what not what their DNA was, but what their pedigree was. And for me, I looked at it totally differently. And so we got off the interview after, and we're kind of like doing like this post-mortem, kind of like, how did this go? And then one of the guys goes, I wasn't very impressed by him. And he said it in such a way that like, he wasn't good enough for me. And honestly, I would have hired the person on the spot. They were very good. It was more about like, they didn't see the world like I saw the world, And I think that's kind of what, I don't know, maybe what I don't love.
Yeah, well, I do. To go back to that point, I don't think it gets talked about enough, is that authenticity, right? I think it gets mistaken sometimes like, oh, I can be a dick because I can be authentic. Totally. And it's like, it's not that either.
Yeah, right.
It's reading the room enough where, you know, you don't let people off the hook for things. You know, when I do sessions with my guys, every now and then somebody will start, you know, saying something. And if I catch, I'm kind of like sensitive, like when something's off, I'll just call it out. And it's like, hold on a second, let's come back to this. You said this. Like, let's dig into that a little bit. Like, why was that okay in your opinion? I want to know what was going through your mind. But like, being authentic doesn't give you license to just be mean or rude. I think that's where, you know, like Trump got in trouble because he was authentic, but if you're an asshole to everybody, you just make too many enemies. And so ultimately you have to figure out that skill of being authentic or saying what needs to be said or being real without offending your audience to the point where you create real enemies that are just do anything to take you down, which is what we saw.
Yeah, totally. I think there's a lot of counterfeits to authenticity. So I like that. I like the way that you're looking at it. It is true. It's unfortunate for Trump, right? Because I mean, in every way, you know, I think I liked him principally because he wasn't a politician, and I don't trust any politicians on any side.
Yeah,
right?
He was authentic.
Like, he was authentic, right? Like, you know, like it's the antithesis of it, you know, authenticity.
It's like the opposite of Mitt Romney. You've listened to him and you're like, you're so full of shit. Like, I know you're like, thinking things. And then you see his documentary on Netflix. You're like, he was full of shit. Look, he should have just been that guy. He would have won the damn presidency, you know?
Yeah, it's frustrating. Yeah, be yourself, right? But again, going back to the coaching material that you're talking about, it's a counterfeit to say that I just am what I am, right? I'm severely overweight, or like I don't like to work, so therefore
I don't allow my guys to say they're addicts.
Yeah.
You're not a sex addict. You like to have sex. You have a high libido, whatever. You're not an alcoholic. You happen to like drinking. You know what I mean? Like, I hate giving those titles because it's almost excuses the behavior.
It kind of does. In fact, this is a big tangent, but we'll go down it. So today, all right, so my son goes, of course, right, he goes to this, like, we can't just send him to a regular school, right? We have to send him to a Montessori school. Do you know what a Montessori school is?
I went to a Montessori school.
Did you really?
Yeah.
Okay. Fantastic education, honestly. Like, my son comes home every day from school, like, talking about all the things he's learning. And I'm like, geez, man, I wish I had gone to, you know, this kind of program. And anyway, but he keeps getting in trouble at school, right? So like,
this kid would get along.
Yeah, there you go. You would definitely get along, right? And he's actually a lot like me. I was not built for school. And so it's funny, I'm listening to these teachers explain and describe my son, and definitely there's behavior that he needs to do better, right? But then also I'm thinking, like, I don't know that he belongs in this situation. You know? And okay, granted, you know, children need to kind of matriculate and learn how to be like functioning members of society, but he doesn't, like, you know, totally belong. And so, you know, nobody's diagnosed him with ADHD, but like everyone kind of looks at him like that's his problem. And I look at it and go like, this kid's got a superpower, you know? And it's just kind of funny how we like label things a little bit, you know?
Yeah, well, you know, Jeff Neiman, the founder of JetBlue, he said, well, because he has severe ADHD and they wanted to medicate him, and he said, then I'd be just like you people, you know?
Exactly.
He's like, to be able to understand that. You know, at a young age, it was funny, my buddies would laugh about it now, is they're like, because the ones that were with me even in elementary school, they're like, dude, you would get in trouble and you wouldn't even understand how or why you were in trouble. And it was so funny for us to watch because I didn't get it, you know? And I did have to learn how to, like, be more socially intelligent with every situation. But there are things that, you know, you get mad at a fish because he can't climb a tree. Well, the fish was never supposed to be climbing the tree. And so,
So like, do we label these things sometimes as disorders, or are they just different?
Sure.
You know, it's kind of nuts.
Yeah. Well, I want to get into your story. I mean, it's such a fascinating story. You mentioned 2016, you started Jump. Maybe back into it a little bit, though. What were you doing before that?
Yeah, so I'll give you kind of the Reader's Digest a little bit before. So I was like, you know, my parents were small business owners, and I saw like feast and famine with being an entrepreneur and business owner. I was like, yeah, I don't want to do that. So I go to school. I'm like, I'm going to go be a lawyer, right? The safest, like, money job I can get, you know? And anyway, I'm like in my last semester at BYU, actually my undergrad, and I'm like, yeah, this is not for me. Like, I can't do it, you know? And I just like kept trying to force the issue, but it just really wasn't me. And so I quit school in my last semester. I had 3 classes left.
You literally just dropped out?
I literally left school. Like
Did
literally
part of you drop out so you could use it as like your dropout story?
Yes. No, but that's why I haven't gone back.
Being authentic.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, so I remember having that conversation with my wife, and she was just like, well, that wasn't part of the deal. I was supposed to marry a lawyer, you know?
That's
just
funny.
kidding. She was awesome. Super supportive. But the question was like, what's next? So,
Right.
you know, I started doing a couple of things, to sell and generate income like right away, like just kind of not really business owner, but like independent person. I started teaching people how to sell actually, and started charging them for that, and then used a little bit of that money to start my first company with a cousin of mine in California. So we moved back to California in 2013.
Okay. What company was that?
It was called Scout. And it was more like if you're familiar with like a Boostability, or do you remember Orange Soda here in Utah?
Mm-hmm.
It was more like that. It was like more of a digital marketing services company. And then we had some software component of like reporting and stuff like that. We grew that to about 3.5 million in sales over about 3.5 years. And then I sold my shares out to my other partners, and to go then start a full vertical SaaS company. And so that was Jump. And that was, so I sold out of Scout in 2016.
Okay.
Yeah.
Where did the idea for Jump come from, or how did you know what you wanted to go into?
Good question. So basically, I already like learned a lot because of it. Because basically, Jump was the automated version of some of the things we were doing manually at Scout. So we had kind of like I already knew the industry, and so essentially, like we could build a lot of. We could productize some services, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. And so that's really kind of how Jump started. And Jump became a customer engagement platform, text messaging, review generation, listing distribution. And so, we started that and grew that for a few years through 2019.
And so when you started it out, because you ended up having a multiple 8-figure exit, a huge exit, right, on that company. Yeah. You went from really just kind of making it to really having this huge exit. Did you see it going that way, or did you?
No, especially not that fast. Like, so year one, we went from 0 to $1 million of ARR, annual recurring revenue. Mm-hmm. And then year two, we went from 1 to 5 million, and then grew a little bit more before we sold. We sold at about 6.5 million is kind of where our annual revenue, exactly, annual recurring revenue. And so it went really fast, but you look at like that business as being like, in a silo, and like that thing went really fast or went well, and not everything went well, but but really it's like the whole like journey as an entrepreneur led up to that point. So really it felt like I was working on it much longer than that.
Yeah. What do you attribute that huge success to? What are a couple things that maybe you, looking back, you're like, wow, we really nailed that part of the business? We
went really fast. Everything we did was fast.
How'd you do that?
I was incredibly impatient. And we just had a culture for not settling. Like literally everything that we thought we could do, let's do it faster. And I just, in fact, one of our core values at the company, my favorite one, not everyone, but some people hated it. It was controversial. Every core value should be controversial. And the core value was, fast is better than slow.
Well, that's Jeff Bezos. That's what he's always preaching.
Yeah, exactly.
That was their driving force at Amazon, was we can do this quicker. And he busted the internet when he said, we can literally have this shit delivered tomorrow, today.
Totally.
And people are like, dude, you're insane. But he did.
You can. There's trade-offs, right? Okay, maybe you can't ship every feature of that product.
Maybe the employees don't get to have pee breaks, so they have to pee in bottles over at the Amazon warehouse, and that's going to leak out in 10 years. But in the meanwhile, we're going to get you your package tomorrow.
Totally. And you got to know when to take breaks, right? Yeah. But you got to go fast. I don't know how else to describe it. Whatever you think you could do faster. Yeah. Go faster.
Well, it's funny. I was talking to my team this morning. We have a content meeting every week just to, all right, what are we going to put out? I've got my vlog, I got my blog, I got my TikTok and Instagram, all these channels I'm trying to grow. And meanwhile, I've got books going and I got all these other things going, podcasts, right?
Right.
And I talked to my team today and I said, guys, it's funny that we brought this topic. I'm glad to hear you say that, because I literally said, we just aren't going fast enough. Yeah. We need to be able to get more done in less time. I need to know where the inefficiencies are. It's no longer okay to come to this meeting and say, I didn't have fast enough internet. Well, what's the new solution? Because I'm not having this problem twice. Where were you at? What could have we done different? And it's just fascinating because I do think that speed in business, in a lot of things, it really matters quite a bit. I think one of my biggest advantages I had as a realtor is I was always 6 months ahead of everybody else in where the market was going. And so I was doing stuff. By the time they figured it out, I was already right in the middle of it.
Right.
That was all speed.
It's interesting though, like, the concept of speed. So you have to think about that. I remember I started getting into like driving, race cars. Of course, now you're going to ask me about that. But before we get to that,
we'll come back to that.
Yeah, we'll come back to that. But like this idea of speed, the fastest drivers are the best at braking. And think about that. Like there are times, it doesn't just mean that we just throw everything at the wall and hope that it sticks and we do things sloppy. Speed, again, counterfeits, right? We're talking about counterfeits to authenticity. Like counterfeits to speed, it doesn't just mean going fast and shipping poor quality. It means that we do the best we can within these parameters as fast as we can, right? If it's unrealistic, then it's unrealistic, right? And then we talk about what is realistic. So it's always our job as a leader. I used to say this, I haven't said this a long time, but like to be reasonably unreasonable, right? Like, okay, you said it's Monday, right? It will be done Monday. Well, what's keeping us from Wednesday? Right? And
I like to ask the question. It's like, if that wasn't an option, if we had to have it done by Wednesday, what would we do differently?
Yeah.
How would we make that happen? Right. And just asking the question, because our mind gets trained to think a way that we train it. And so it's like why you just have to ask your mind better questions. If that wasn't a possibility, if we had to get it done by Wednesday, how would we do it, right? If we could do this cheaper, how would we do it? If we could do this faster, how would we do that? And just by asking the question, you start to come up with solutions.
I totally agree. Absolutely agree.
And so when you sold Jump, you sold pretty quick. Was that a tough decision? Dude,
it was so hard. It was like gut wrenching. I felt like, because always you can do more, right? You could push more, you could go further. And we came to a point where it was either raised we had raised like 8.5 million, and then I had another 1.5 million on the table. So it was like 10. And we'd grown really fast, but the problem was we went out to like go fundraise from these very big investors. We're talking like $35 million round. And it's like a daily colonoscopy going through that shit. Like that due diligence is just like rough, man.
Yeah.
And we had grown so fast. So they're all like, well, give us a couple more quarters of growth. And I'm like, that's too long. It needs to be now. And so there was some pressure on like, is the fundraising going to continue to work out, which is a whole other conversation of whether you should fundraise or not, or whatever, or when. And so, and then we got a couple of offers literally within a couple of weeks of each other. And I remember I was like so stressed out about the idea of selling, because selling, regardless of like the number or what it meant or what the acquisition looked like, it felt like I was thrown in the towel. You know what I mean? Like, and so that was a really weird feeling. Like that's the only time in my life where I like felt chronically depressed, like for more than a few days.
Like as you were selling the company.
Oh yeah, for sure. It just felt like we had gone so hard. We had done so well. And then the thought of like, I'm done. It just felt like a piece of you was
Did you stay on the company, or
no.
So you sold them?
And I was going to.
Yeah, a lot of times that's the case.
I was going to, and it actually caused quite a big problem with the deal, because I said about a month prior to closing, I was like, I'm not part of it, and it's like, why? And for me, it was just like, I just couldn't do it. Mm-hmm. Everyone I had talked to that had committed to do that, they hated their lives for 3-5 years.
I had Garrett G on, and he, one of my first episodes, I think episode like 12 or something, but he, he sold his company to Snapchat, and my buddy Kirk, and they wanted him to stay on. And it was interesting because he wanted to play soccer at BYU, and it was a club. And he basically had to give up. They were paying him this ginormous salary to keep him there.
Exactly.
But he was miserable. Mm-hmm. And he said, it was only been a month or two. And he was like, no, I am so out on this. And he gave it up to go play soccer at BYU, basically, But that led to his next thing, which was,
Yeah, exactly. Like, think of where I'd been if I'd gone down that path. And like, essentially overnight, you become an employee.
Right.
And when you're an entrepreneur, like, dude, I can't just...
Somebody tells you when you have to go to work and what you have to do.
Or when you can take a shit. Yeah. Like, all of the things, right? And you think like that wouldn't happen, but as I got closer and closer, like just the team, they were just very transactional. And I was like, there's just there's just no way I can do that. So
after you sold it, then how'd you get out of that funk and how'd you figure out what to do next?
It's a great question. It got weirder before it got better. And it got weirder because I sold the company and a few months later, the pandemic happened. And I'm like, I guess we're staying home, like, so the good news was like, we just had my first kid, my son. And, he's, I don't know, he'd have been maybe close to a year at that point. And it was great to make up time. Like, that was great. Like, I spent so much time with my family. And then, so basically I took some time off. We did some traveling, of course. And then the pandemic happened and we just spent a ton of time together. And then my dad actually passed away. So this would have been, we sold at the end of 2019 and then the pandemic in 2020. My dad passed away like in November of 2020, not from COVID. And I just was like, dude, life's freaking short, man. My mom died when I was 10 days old. Wow. My dad died, he was 71. And so I was like, life's short, man. What do we want to do? And I was like, that's why I want to race. And so I started racing in 2020 and then did that for 2 seasons. And then a year and a half ago, I started putting together the idea for Distro and then assembled a team.
Wow. So well, what a gift though, to be able to, just take some time and kind of have that perspective, right? Yeah. Like all of a sudden you've had this huge cash exit and you get to go, wait, like, what do I really want my life to be? What do I want to spend my time on? Where do I want to put my investment? I think like a lot of entrepreneurs and just men in general, you do get restless though, because we're not meant to just stay at home with the kid all day. And I think that's a misconception that some people have. Like if you're not building, if you're not growing and contributing, you're going to have a lack of fulfillment in your life.
My wife described it as like, because we were good, right? Like, if I had held out longer, like, made more money or whatever, but like we were good, like I was fine. We didn't need to work. I could just kind of hang out, be retired. I'm like 33, I don't know. And anyway, like I was enjoying the break for sure, but literally within a matter of months, I'm like, what else could I build? Or what else could I do? Or let me dabble here or that. And the racing, I like kind of treated it as a business. It's like, sponsors and all that stuff.
But building something.
Yeah. And I got that going and that's a thing now. And I'm like, all right, what now? And I remember telling my wife, so in the fall of 21 is when we came up with the idea for Distro. I mean, my co-founders. And I was like, what do you think about me going and doing this again? And she's like, why? Well, why not? Like, we didn't do this to just be mediocre. I think she said the word mediocre. And I was like,
it's a good wife.
Okay, well, let's do, like, you know what that means, right? Like, it's going to be a little less comfortable and we're going to take risks and like, it's going to be different. And she's like, yeah, let's do it. And the truth is I'm more bougie than my wife, I think too. So yeah, she's pretty easygoing.
Well, and that is kind of that concept of, right. I think in our core we want to feel alive. We want to be building. We want to take risks and do those things and make ourselves uncomfortable. It's such a beautiful thing to do. In this case, it's kind of an interesting one because you're like, okay, I know how to do this now. There is kind of like there's a comfort to just knowing you know how to do the thing, right? Yeah. I mean, you are the asset at that point, and so you're not really worried about it working per se. It's just a matter of picking the right angle to go at it.
Yeah. And there's risks in like, again, in the market, right? There's risks in like certain shifts or product paradigms. Like, I mean, anything can happen, right? Like you can buy a property and it could go freaking sideways and you had no idea, right? I mean, it shouldn't happen often, right? Because we have experience.
If you know what you're doing, it won't happen, or it shouldn't. Yes.
It shouldn't happen, right? But at the end of the day, anything can happen. And so you just kind of have to stomach those risks. But aside from that, like, yeah, you know who not to hire now for the most part, right? You know, like where not to spend your money or what questions to ask. Those things are huge advantages around the second time.
And even the very business that you came up with, Distro, you probably were able to come up with the idea because of need that you saw with 100%. Your previous companies. Maybe I'm just guessing, but I can already tell because I know what you guys do. Maybe speak to what you do and how you came up with that, saw that need in the marketplace. Because I think that's all good companies. You see an inefficiency, you see a need, and then you go tackle it head on.
You're exactly right. That's literally what happened, which is helpful, right? Because you're not creating this crazy like ambiguous product that nobody really knows about. So for me, what happened is when I was exiting Jump, my payroll, my total expenses were near $1 million. It was just under $1 million, and payroll was over 900,000 a month of that. That was a big number, right? And over a third of that was payroll just for engineering. And I was like, that's crazy. I'm not doing this shit again. And like they, the engineer, bless their hearts, dude, they come to you every 2 months asking for a raise because they're getting recruited from somebody else. And it literally just goes like this and compounds.
The cost of replacing one of them, they know your whole system. It's just, you're kind of.
Yeah. It's intense.
At the mercy a little.
You are. And you have a literal like 28-year-old senior software engineer who's making like $280 a year base, right? Without payroll tax and, all the other stuff. And it's just not supportable. Like you just can't do that. Even for the companies raising $100 million at a time, it's just nuts, right? We're not everyone's a Twitter or maybe pre-Musk Twitter, right? Or like a Facebook. And so I had the idea of like, there's got to be a better way to do this, because your only options when you're a CTO or a founder building a tech company is to go hire a dev shop, which is like an outsourced services company. It's a long contract. You don't know who you're hiring. You're not managing them. You're hoping they get it right. They don't understand your company's purpose.
And they're not necessarily part of your culture.
They're not. Mm-hmm. They're not. So there's just inherent risks there unless you're like totally babysitting it. So I'm like, what if we could connect the company's hiring with these really good people around the globe, because they're great and talented, and just let them work directly with each other, and just let's disrupt this whole dev shop bullshit anyway, and there's definitely still a use case for companies to hire a dev shop, but for like vertical SaaS companies, traditional tech companies, consumer-based companies, it's just not as good of a fit.
Well, and I mean, if you're trying to raise capital and have an exit, they want to see that your engineers work for you as well. They don't want you working with a dev shop. I mean, that's a huge red flag, right?
Exactly. Like you really need to have creative control over what's happening there. And so anyway, that's essentially how we built Distro. So we created a marketplace similar, like, have you heard of Fiverr or Upwork? I'm sure.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah. So similar, conceptually to that, but not gig-based. Distro's for full-time people. So you're intending to hire like a, senior front-end engineer, and you can do that through Distro and generally save 25, 30%, in hiring those people.
And so your company is essentially taking developers from all over the world.
Yeah.
And then connecting them as full-time employees with tech companies.
Correct.
Got it.
Correct.
And so how many, currently you've only been doing this, what, a year and a half, I think you said?
Yeah. So we started writing code like 17 months ago or so. And then we went to market about a year ago.
Okay. And then how many developers have you placed in tech companies at this point?
So it's 45, 50 or something like that.
Wow.
No, maybe more than, it's got to be more than that now. So we just had more hired, but yeah, so definitely enough to be like, is this going to work?
Yeah.
And with big major funded, startups here, locally too.
Well, I mean, it's a perfect area to be doing it in, right? Yes. I was on the board for Entrada for a while.
Oh, yeah,
which is one of the biggest companies in
Dave Bateman's
Utah,
Yeah.
And the biggest issue was always needing more developers. I was always shocked to look at the financials and see how much money was being paid to developers. I'm like, geez, tell your kids to go start learning how to develop there. But there was such a need for it, and they were always trying to poach them from other companies because there's only so many of them that are good at it.
Exactly. And that's part of the problem, is finding the right ones, because, nobody wants to hire the junior guys.
How do you vet them?
So we go through a vetting process. It's pretty simple, like English and some basic skills vetting. But the interesting thing is when we started building our technology, we actually scrapped the first couple months of the code we wrote because we thought our value was going to be in the vetting. And it turns out it wasn't, because all of our customers did their own vetting. And so we figured out a way.
Give them a test, basically?
Essentially, yeah. So like for they'll do like technical interviews. They'll do like a screen shared like live coding interview and watch them code, which is cool. And then like peer interviews, manager interviews. Most tech companies interview at least 5 times, which is kind of a lot. Yeah.
Dude, I hate hiring and firing. I was looking for an executive assistant a couple of weeks back, and I feel bad telling somebody no, but it's like, if they're not the right fit, they're not the right fit. And I actually started doing those instead of just doing an interview. I started giving them a task and seeing like, how quickly can you come up with this and how accurate can you be? Because what I wanted to see is, can you work how I work?
Yep.
I'm a very unique individual. I have 30 plus companies I'm a part of in one way or another, 10 that I'm actively working on, and 2 that are like huge companies that I'm the main piece, right? And so it's like, how can you interact with everything I have going? And I gave her one of the job applicants, for example, I gave him a task and it came back, but it wasn't accurate. They'd added their own stuff in, they'd changed things, and it was hard for me to understand. And I was like, okay, we would never work together. Like I needed you to take the task and do it exactly as I needed, because I don't have time to go back now and fix add the extra things.
Hiring an assistant is very difficult.
So hard. How do I do it?
Yeah. I'll tell you how I did it.
Yeah.
I got lucky. I hired everyone who knows me knows Brittany, because she responds from most everything I do. Sure. So she's been working for me for almost 8 years. So she was at my first startup, second, and now Distro. So super convenient. So when you have somebody that is as helpful as this person is, just do your best to take care of them for sure.
Well, with my real estate team, I ended up finding my buddy Chris. He's best friend since we were 12. I literally baptized him when we were 17.
Oh, really?
Introduced him to his wife. This dude cares more about me as a human than I care about myself, right? Yeah. This dude's got my back to the point that when I started saving money differently, I set up a separate bank account in another bank. And so that I wouldn't spend the money, I didn't have access to the account. If I'd have died at any point in that, it was his account. Essentially, that's how much I trust him. But, we worked perfectly together because we're the opposites. I mean, I'm traveling all the time, networking every night, doing all these different things. He wants to be home, and he's just loyal as the day is long, and the exact opposite of me. But to this day, he's my guy for all my real estate stuff, because I found that perfect person. It was almost by accident, but
he helps you as an admin.
So he does he does basically everything on the real estate side, minus me just bringing the deals together and stuff.
It's awesome.
And he's amazing. But what I did is I paid him a percentage of what we made.
There you go.
So he was the highest paid, quote unquote, assistant. He wasn't even an assistant. He's like a partner, but he's the highest paid in the state. I guarantee it. In the years that we really popped, he crushed it. And I'm so happy about that, right?
That's awesome.
And so people would all the time try to hire him away, and they'd offer him hey, we'll give you a really good salary. They'd offer him literally a quarter of what I was paying him, because they didn't understand how much he was actually making. That was
competitive for them.
Oh, they were we'll pay you extra. We've never paid this much, and he's A, you couldn't hire me for any amount of money, but B, this is cute, That's
funny.
So, and so with Distro, by the way, how'd you come up with the name? What the hell does that even mean?
Yeah, so Distro stands for distributed teams. And then the Distros actually has kind of a tech play. There's an open source technology that people refer to as Distro.
Got it.
It's based on Linux. So kind of, anyway, techy nerdy. But
being a tech guy, it's everything's moving so fast. The whole AI game, obviously, right? I mean, we're clearly going to destroy ourselves within the next 70 years. I've got to figure. But does it worry you as a tech? I mean, you probably understand a lot of it more than the average person.
No, it definitely worries me. So the first time that I opened up a Chat GPT and I ran a query on it, and it returned it right away, and I was freaked out, literally freaked out. It's scary not being able to tell. And you could say you can tell, but you're full of shit. Because the truth is okay, you can fool Chat GPT a little bit here and there, totally. But for the most part, you can't tell.
Well, and something that I saw said humans won't be replaced by Chat GPT. They'll be replaced by a human that knows how to work Chat GPT. And I was like, damn, that's a different
Well, that's
game.
how it is, right? So writing blog posts, right? You can prompt it to write, but you still have to come up with what's going to be written about. What are the bullet points, right? And then you have to proofread it. Then you have to tag the SEO properly. Then you have to do the imagery and do the links. So that you still need people, right?
Oh, yeah.
But it's still scary. Think about what can be done with transcription technology and that. So, and we've already had scammy call centers forever, right? I've built call center software before. I'm really familiar with it. And then you can transcribe everything going on. Imagine 1,000 phone calls going out at once to a bunch of old people, and then picking up the phone thinking they're talking to American Express or their mortgage company or whatever. And then somebody feeding data over, right? In real time. You don't know who you're talking to.
Wow. They used to need a bunch of people in Nigeria to do that.
Yeah, now you don't, right? We need one person in Nigeria to do that. Yeah. And so that's what's scary. And then there's this stuff, Elon Musk is 20 years, 30 years ahead of us, right? And he's thinking way out in the future, and he's scared. He's saying, hey, we need to like look at ourselves and do some soul searching, because this is going to get out of hand real fast.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, you start looking at it, I've joked around for years. I said, I see no plausible way that we last as a society or as a species more than 70 more years. Because when you see the speed at which everything's going, it won't be long before people can make their own atomic bombs. Like, it won't be long before, like, all this information is just getting so available and it's processing so quickly. It's hard to believe that we're not going to accidentally blow ourselves up.
Well, it's like, since the election, everyone's been talking like and using this term like misinformation, right? Sure, it exists, right? So, maybe there's like this political stigma about, what is or isn't and who should decide. Well, we just threw a freaking nuke bomb in the whole thing by introducing Chat GPT. It can tell you anything, whether it's true or not true. It will give you its opinion. I don't know if you've signed up yet. I'm assuming you have, but when you go in, it gives you a couple disclaimers. It says, do not give it your personal information. That's freaking scary.
It is scary.
Right?
I mean, I've seen Terminator 2. I know how this game ends.
Yeah, I know. It's not good. It's definitely
I actually haven't signed up yet.
You should.
I know. I saw something the other day. It talked about the speed at which different websites got, I think it was 5 million users. And have you ever seen that? So it's like Facebook was like 40 months. Instagram was like, 24 months. And then it showed Chat GPT.
Overnight,
2 months. It was crazy how fast it's.
Well, even when it hits 5 million, I bet you the 5 to 100 million was like.
Well, the crazy part too is every time it's used, every time people give it information, it gets that much better. Yes. Yeah. It's like, I used to have this with Zillow, right? I would tell agents, because they would pay Zillow for leads and then they'd put all their information into Zillow. I said, you guys are literally feeding the beast that's trying to destroy you.
Exactly.
And they're like, yeah, but short term, because I've always in my business thought long term. It's why I did client events instead of trying to run Facebook ads, right? I was always playing the long game. Like, if I just do enough good now, I know that business will come in later. It might be 5 years, it might be 10 years. I can't quantify it, but I know it's going to happen. But all these people that are short-minded, they keep paying Zillow all this money to literally create a competitor that's trying to destroy. And that's kind of how I look at Chat GPT. It's just like, it's going to try to defeat us ultimately.
And it's gone though, right? Like, it's already a snowball at this point. It's like trying to get rid of guns, right? Like, no one's going to successfully do it. There's too many. Right. Present to me a plan that makes sense, because it just doesn't make sense. Like, when you look at Chat GPT, like it is its own living, breathing thing, like, metaphorically and not, it's basically a decision tree. Like, the database is set up in a decision tree. And every time you feed that decision tree more data, it becomes, what we call smarter. It's not actually smart, but you're giving it more data with which it can make decisions.
Get enough data, you can start to really.
Yeah.
Well, it's kind of funny because it's like I'm kind of against the idea of Chat GPT just because it scares me.
Yeah.
But one of the reasons I started my podcast is I was at a Tony Robbins event 6.5 years ago.
Okay.
And he had a futurist there, Peter Diamandis, and he was talking about how if you have 400 hours of your voice talking and like giving your opinions, like me talking on a podcast, then he said AI will be able to take you and replicate you. So if I were to die tomorrow, they could, with like 99% accuracy, repeat in my voice what I would have said.
Correct.
And it's kind of wild, kind of a crazy thought. So at the time, I really liked that idea. But now I'm like, oh, do we even want that? A bunch of...
Do we need that? Let's ask ourselves, do we need that? Right? Like, it's really
like, people are supposed to die. Those ideas are supposed to die off. We're evolving into a new species.
Yeah, like it's kind of crazy. I was listening to, I think it was on the Lex Friedman podcast, and Lex was talking, and I think Joe Rogan hosted Lex Friedman, and they were talking about Chat GPT like a week after it came out. And of course, right, it was the new popular thing. And I think at the time, Lex said that was 70 billion data points, 70 billion phrases that it was running off of at that time.
And now,
oh, dude, quadruple that, I mean, at least there's just so much data. So it's not going anywhere, right? Like, whatever's happening now is going to enhance the world in for good or bad.
Well, and it's everything has its good and bad. That's the polarity of life itself, I think. And so it's like you said, you might as well try to take advantage of the parts where you can benefit, but just being aware of like, hey, this, I'm afraid of deep fakes because you get one person making the wrong. If deep fakes get good enough, somebody pisses off somebody else, the nukes get released, and then all of a sudden we got millions of people dead. Like, I mean, that's bad. And that's the part that scares me because I think humans still have this ability to rationally, it's very rare that somebody kills another person or loses it to that extent, but you get the wrong person, and people getting offended by things that aren't even real.
Right. How often does that happen on Facebook? Right?
Yeah. So we talk about the fears of tech. I mean, just because this is such a space that you play in at such a high level, what are the opportunities currently in tech?
That's a great question. I think there's a lot of opportunity right now in fintech or financial tech, and really Distro at its core. Distro is that we essentially move money around the globe. So we issue automated payments to over 200 countries now. So I think there's huge opportunities there, and then everyone's jumping on anything AI related, which is funny. We say that and it sounds super ambiguous because most people using the term don't really understand it. But basically what they're doing is they're taking somebody else's data sets, like Chat GPT, or OpenAI, and then they're layering their own app on top of it with their data. And so there's going to be a lot of that, right? Like there's what's it called? It's super AI or something like that. You'll have to Google it, but it's Surfer AI. And basically what they're doing is they're taking the Chat GPT API and they're essentially allowing you to write instantaneously 100 blog posts. So it's creating your topics based on some genre or category, and then taking those topics and then writing the blogs and then delivering all of those to you at once.
Wow.
So like think about stuff like that. That we're going to see more and more of that coming, and that's an opportunity. But of course, just going down to the basics of business, like anywhere you can help a company get more efficient or sell more. Like, I mean, that's where you bring the most value, at least in SaaS. Yeah. Of course, I'm not a big like consumer tech guy. I haven't done that yet, but.
So now that you've jumped into your second big venture, you could say, are you glad you did? Are you enjoying it, or where are you at with the whole thing?
Yeah, I feel like energized every day. I get excited to wake up and solve problems. Like there's something about like going to the edge of darkness and just trying to go see what's over there, like just going and trying something again. And so I'm definitely happy doing it and definitely energized.
What's the best lesson you've learned from doing your first company that you sold for multiple eight figures, to what you're doing now with your new company?
Yeah, good question. One of the biggest problems that I had as a leader growing my first company, we had 80 people at our base. And one of my biggest problems is I kept going to the people around me, like trying to not necessarily be someone else, but almost like get their permission without them telling me I needed permission. Like think about a board. I should have trusted my gut more often. So I kept trying to do the things that were very like, what's the best way to describe it? Like routine, or like the standard way of doing things. Like I tried to hire like the most experienced people, and I didn't need to do that. I tried to pay people the most money, and I didn't need to do that at all. I tried to like piece together. I was very prescriptive, if that makes sense. So here's all the successful tech companies. I'm going to do what they did instead of just doing what worked, because I knew what worked, So I wasted a lot of money. I mean, a lot of money and a lot of time. Could have done even better had I known that. And now I don't screw around with that. Like I'm just going to find the best person, and pay them as well as I can, but I'm not going to go crazy. And we're just going to go build a good business solving a good problem. So there's no need to be prescriptive. It's like I don't know if you've heard this phrase, like there's no one way to load a dishwasher, right? Like
I always say there's no one way to live life.
Yeah,
like we
exactly.
put this expectation on what our life's supposed to look like, but ultimately there's no one right way to do life.
No.
Just do the one that feels good to you, feels right to you,
Right. So like I spent a lot of time doing that, and I've thought a lot about that. And it just goes to this idea, just follow your gut. Like so you're a young entrepreneur and somebody, you want to go talk to somebody, get some advice, right? that person's going to give you advice to their purview, right? Their experience. Take it with a grain of salt. And ultimately learn from what they're doing, but then go do what works for you. So
and a lot of times, one of the problems I have with the whole go get advice from other people is you're not getting advice from the person when they were at the stage where you are. And a lot of times we forget that, right? Like my advice to, I just came out with a Twitter thread about what I would tell myself at 20. And I said, no, Jimmy, you have to really put yourself back there. Like what would you need to hear? Not, this, okay, well, do this, like work hard, invest in real estate. No. It's like, no, really, what would you say to you? Like, and it was really hard to get myself in the mindset to get the right answer to put out there because you're just not thinking as the same human. And it's such a wasted exercise to be like, well, this is what I would do different. A lot of times, I mean, obviously you want to learn lessons, but a lot of times you just didn't have that information. The world also has changed so much, even in the last 10, 15 years, that a lot of that information just isn't relevant.
Yeah, absolutely.
We'll get you out on this question. I mean, you had a huge exit. What was the one thing you splurged on and bought yourself? I guess the race cars probably.
Well, definitely. Yeah. I have so I actually just got another car today.
Tell me about your cars real quick.
So I'm a car guy, but like a real car guy. Okay. Not to knock on the guys that maybe this sounds like they aren't, but I have a shop and I work on cars. I personally weld and wrench and do all those things. It's a skill I've learned just for fun and I love it. Like some guys like to work out. I like to work on cars and that's just like for hours every week. That's kind of my thing. So I like hand built cars with a story. So I bought a Shelby Cobra, like kit car. I built it, did the whole thing.
69?
It's 65.
Oh,
it's
wow.
outside.
Okay.
Yeah. Like a open.
I'm just throwing out some year like I know what the hell that means.
No,
I think I saw that on a movie one time, the 69 Shelby Cobra. It was probably the 65.
Yeah. Exactly. So that, and then the race cars, of course. And then today I just got a Porsche 911 997 to do an LS swap to it. So we're building a full like custom.
Explain that to me like I was seven.
So basically I'm taking a huge naturally aspirated V8 with a lot of horsepower and sticking it in a little...
Explain it to me like I was 4.
Yeah, there we go. I'm making a Porsche much faster.
There you go. That's
exactly. So, but yeah, I'm into that kind of stuff. So, Lamborghinis, Ferraris are cool and stuff, but I like gritty cars, Like, do you know who Ken Block is? Or have you heard it? He died this
he just passed away. Yeah.
So like kind of the same way, he's into like all custom, purpose-built cars for him, That's kind of my thing. I'm more into that, yeah.
And so do you have like a bucket list of something you want to go do that has to do with speed? You want to go in a fighter jet? That's one thing that I want to do. There was actually an online auction for one a couple months ago, but it was went a little bit higher than I was willing to go. Cool. But do you have a bucket list, something you want to do just that speed,
I definitely want to go race on the Nürburgring. So I'm an off-road desert racer driver. Okay. And so desert's more
like
my
the Baja?
thing. Yes, exactly.
You done it?
I haven't done Baja. I race in the Best in the Desert, which is the U.S.
version.
Yeah, exactly. The U.S. series, basically. Okay.
And is that in Nevada?
And some do both. Most are in Nevada.
Yeah, I've heard
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, or like the Mint 400. That's technically outside of it, but that type of racing. But like road racing, I'll do for fun. But I want to race on the Nürburgring, which is one of the oldest, most iconic racetracks ever in Germany, and I really want to do that.
That's where that Disney castle is.
Yeah.
I believe it's the same place.
Yeah. It's the track's it was built in like the 20s or something like that, like before World War II, and it's still used and it's super dangerous.
So when are you going?
I don't know. I just need to book a trip. It's a good question.
Yeah.
So soon?
I'm one of those guys that challenges, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Bro, you need to go
Let's
do that.
It. Yeah.
I like that. I'm in.
Yeah, you should come.
Dude, this was a lot of fun, man. Congrats on your success.
Thank you.
Fun to just chop it up with you. There's so many lessons to take away. For people that want to follow your journey, kind of find out more what you got going on.
Yeah, you could follow me personally at Chad Ingram 11 at Instagram. I probably post the most there, and LinkedIn, just because my tech community is on LinkedIn. So you can find me on LinkedIn, just searching Chad Ingram, and then follow us at Distro also, sharing good content there, use cases, and it gets kind of fun. Or you could reach out to me personally at Chad at distro.io.
Awesome, man.
Yeah.
Thanks again.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.